Hi, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the fourth session of the Mongo Workshop. Mongo Workshop. Node Express and MongoDB Workshop. Today we're going to cover MongoDB and Mongoose. So this will be an introduction to what this whole database thing is about. And it is going to be a good introduction for people who are planning to build apps but have no idea how to start, because the database layer, it's like a new world for people who haven't explored that yet. And what I'm going to do here is to share with you how to make it a lot easier compared to me in the past. I've went around looking at many resources, looking at how they do things, and I tried putting things into the DB layer, I tried putting things into the server layer and stuff. So I'm going to share with you why I do certain things the way I do it and what other people may be doing it and their opinions and how to make this whole thing easier. All right. Without further ado, let me start by sharing the screen. Okay, you'll see my desktop. And let me know. I'm going to increase the size a little bit so it's easy for everyone to see. So this is what we have left off in the last lesson. We have created a Mongoose connection with a DB URL. Now, if I bring up my this terminal, and I'll put my terminal on the right side. I tend to do this when I do a server-side project, so I have my terminal right with my VS Code. It's a lot easier for me to see what's going on instead of opening items and putting into another monitor. So this is just a preference of mine. Right now, what we have is that we have a Mongoose connection, and we have connected to a DB database with this URL. And in the past, last session, I also shared with you this app called MongoDB Compass, where you can use. And what you're going to do is copy this MongoDB //localhost 27017. This is the standard MongoDB port on the local computer. So if you have that, so if you copy this and paste it inside this new connection area, you can press connect. I already saved it to localhost. So if you new connection, like do this and then press save and connect, you will have a chance to save this connection like me, and I put it as localhost so I don't have to type it again and again and again. Okay, so let's connect. Oh, it says econ refused because every single time we start a computer, we have to remember to start the MongoDB on our computer. And we can do this by running the MongoDB community command that I shared. That I shared last session. And this is what you need to do if you are doing this on Mongo on a Mac. On Windows, I think it's slightly easier. Basically, there's a brew services run MongoDB community as a command. I have aliased it to Mongot. So I'm just going to write this, Mongot, and we successfully ran the MongoDB community. So the Mongo shell is now open and we can begin connecting. So now if we connect, it says we are connected. We do not have a database yet. This is the database that we're looking at. This is just the connection to the database. So in this case, let's say we have a database called project, or rather Node Express MongoDB project. So this makes it extremely clear that we are going to connect to this database. Okay. And the last thing we need to do is run the server. npm run server. Again, I alias it to rs, easy for me. And we connected to this database. All right, cool. So with this, we're ready to talk about what to do with MongoDB. So let me create a new, say, Google document. I think this will make it slightly easier to keep some notes as we go along. Now, let's see. Node Express MongoDB session 4. All right. So when we start thinking about Mongoose and MongoDB, if you have searched around the internet, you'll see that MongoDB and Mongoose is actually used together a lot. That is because MongoDB is very free-flowing, and you have to remember how you structured the database. It's not easy to remember. So let me just give you an example of what the Mongoose database looks like. So this is my course database. I have products and users. And users, I have things like email, first name, password, the role with a series of products that the person has signed up to. Okay, and this is like example. So you can see that database looks very much like JSON, like package JSON. There's just a name, a key property, key property, key property. Key property may be nested, may not be, maybe an array, may not be. Kind of like a thing. So if you use MongoDB by itself, you have to remember how you kind of structured that database. But if you use something like Mongoose, which is like a database modeling tool on top of MongoDB, you can use Mongoose to remember what the shape of the database is. So you can always refer to it. So what we're going to do is use Mongoose, as I mentioned in the last session. The first thing to do when it comes to using Mongoose is to create a model. Most people would begin by sharing with you to create a model folder, and then you can maybe say create a user.model or JS. So when it comes to Mongoose, what we want to do is to first create that model. And in this file, we have to import Mongoose from Mongoose. Mongoose, all right. And at this point, we need to get a schema. So we're going to say const schema equals to mongoose.schema. Now, to make things a little bit easier for you to understand, model is like the mold, like a car mold or a cupcake mold, like cupcake. Does a cupcake have a mold? Like a toy mold, where you can use it to create like a mold of a key. You can use it to create multiple keys. A schema equals to the shape, details of the mold. So like in the mold of a key, there's that key shape inside there. So that's what the schema does. So in this case, what we can do is then create a user schema. Okay, because schema over here is like a thing to create schemas with. It's not a schema created yet. And at the end, we need to export default because we're using ESM now. Export default mongoose.model user and the schema. So this is how you create a model. And we are going to keep things very simple at this point. We're just going to say that there is a first name, and it's going to be a string. And there is a last name, is going to be a string. And then there's the email. It's going to be a string as well. Okay, so this is how you configure a schema. You're just going to say that this property is a string, or it's a number, it's a date, object, kind of a thing. So when you put data into the database, that data type is going to be correct. The reason why we do something like this is because databases are, well, when you store things into a database, you want to make sure that the data is correct. So when you get information out of that database, you don't have to worry about whether you have to pass that thing again and all that stuff. So we do all the work before saving it in. Now, when it comes to emails, like if you are doing a user schema, First name can be, well, many people can have the same first name. Many people can have the same last name. But ideally, we only have one person with one email address. Mongoose allows us to expand this thing by creating an object out of it. And we can still say the type is string. And we can say that we want it to be unique. So, for example, my email is zelwk@gmail.com. If I say the email is unique, there can only be one instance of zelwk@gmail.com inside the database. That allows you to use email as authentication, which we will cover later. Now, there are a couple of things more. We can say unique is true. We can say lowercase is true. So the email will be all lowercase, no matter how it's being provided. We can also say trim is true, so there's no white spaces when it's being saved. Now, we can do this on the model layer. We can also do this in the service layer, which I'm going to talk about later. Okay, so after creating the user schema, we can't really see it yet. So this is sort of like we're still waddling in the dark right now. To actually see it in practice, we need to insert something into the user schema. So it actually populates on the MongoDB campus. Okay, and the easiest way to do that, okay, is to add something in there. Okay, I'm just going to go into the start.js file and import a new, let's see. All right, I'm going to go into the server.js file. I'm going to import user from model.user_model.js. Okay, if I log user, I should be able to see the model user. Now, I'm not sure if we can kind of like hack it and do a insertion to let you see at this point, but let's try. Once user equals to new user, and then we have a first name is Zel, last name is Leo, and email is, let's say, abcde@gmail.com. Okay, and we can log the user. This is what it looks like. It's exactly the same as the schema that we've created. And there is a new ID field. This is like the unique identifier that MongoDB creates for you automatically. If you need to refer to a user or any other item inside a model, MongoDB calls it a document. So if you want to refer to any document, you can use the ID, or you can query with a unique string or stuff like that. We will talk about it in a bit. So we can then put this into the database by saying .save. Okay, it's not going to log anything since we never console log anything, but if we go back to our databases and hit refresh, we now have something inside our users, inside our database. There's a user collection. So I know there's a lot of terms right now, but every model from Mongoose will be created as a collection in MongoDB. It's basically the same as saying that we have a group of users. Okay, this thing is called users, a category, kind of something like that. And we just added first name and email. And apparently last name is not being populated inside here. So let's check why. And that's because we did not spell last name with the correct casing. It's supposed to be with a capital N. So the thing about Mongoose, which is nice that now that we're seeing it, is that when we insert property that is not written in the schema, it refuses to update the document. So you can't go out of whack with your documents, putting things all over the place by accident, by intention, by whatever. So you always have to update the model first before you update your document. Now, I save this again, and if you look on the right hand side, you can see that E110000 duplicate key error collection, blah blah blah. Well, this is saying that the user is already existing inside the database, and so we cannot create the same user with the same email. So this is what I mean by unique is true. So this allows you to prevent more of the same emails from showing up. And to update this, we can throw away, this is a trash icon, delete the item. And if we save it again, now it's populating because we're just like saving it when the file gets run, not because of an API and stuff like that right now. And if we refresh, I think we can refresh it. Now, where do we refresh this? All right, Command R, refresh. This one, if there are any documents. And now we see that there is a first name and there's a last name and there's an email, which is the same as what we have in our model. Any questions so far? Okay, cool. So this is how you create, you put things into the database, and we have now seen that it's tangible. We can see it inside here. But how do we use it in an app? That's where the main question is. So to put this into an app, what we need to do is to go to our API, in this case, V1. I'm going to remove these two since there's no real need for them. And we're going to create a user route. Now, when we're creating any routes, it's usually, let's just do this. There are a couple of things that we need to do. We need to create a, let's, okay, so this is the general way a route is being written. I think I have talked about it in the last session. Did I? No, in the end, we didn't have this. In API Masterclass, session number 3. So this kind of like is the generic structure of an API. So I'm going to put it inside the MongoDB thing. Oops. Screenshot. There you go. This is the generic structure. And I'm going to put it inside here so you can have an easy reference to it. All right. Now, if we go back into this, and you can see that there's get, which gets a list of users. There's get user/ID, which gets one specific user. There's get/user, which gets the current authenticated user. Post/users, which creates many users at the same time. Post/user, which creates one user, and so on and so forth. So this is generally how you create a resource in an API. Now, in this case, I'm going to make things a lot simpler. We are going to not do so many things. We're just going to create one user. So that's why router.post user. Okay, and to get to this, the next thing we need to do is to have a request handler. So this is how it looks like. This thing over here is called a request handler. Let's say request handler, but it's also called a controller. So in many of the Express apps, you will notice that people actually say you should create a controller like this, like controller folder, and say user controller. Okay, yes. And you write the controller code inside here. So let me move it. And what you do over here is an import, say, controller, and we call it user controller. And then we can export, say, create user. And then there is request, response, which is going to be an async function. We can put it inside here. Let's get create user. And this is how it's going to look like. Oh, no. Bad link. // controllers. Hold on. The thing about GitHub, usually we can do IntelliSense and grab the file name, but sometimes GitHub Copilot screws it up. Export function, create user, that's fine. Oh, I did not save it. That's why. Okay. And now we need to be able to get to this API, right? So in the midst of coding, most people do like use a thing called Postman, which allows you to send an API request via some sort of interface to the thing, so you can query it straight away. Or we can, like what we did in the past, go to the main.js file and do a query for the API, which we did. So if you want to get to this user, create this, what's this, user API, we go to v1/user and set the method to host. We can do that. So in VS Code, there is this thing called a Thunder client. Where is this? Which allows you to send API requests the same way. So we can go to send a post request now to, I think we can do / because we're running this. Let's give it a try. And we're going to send it to API /v1/user. Okay. Oh, we need to have that. Localhost API/v1/user is processing because we did not return anything, but we can give it a lock and press send again. It says create user. So this is one of the ways you can use a built-in API client inside VS Code to test your APIs. Now there's another method which we'll talk about in the future, where you can actually write tests so that the API works and is tested. So in this case, it's kind of like you have to manually run it to test. Any questions so far? I'm putting a lot of concepts in your head right now. Okay, cool. So then to create a user is what we did previously. So what we do is go back into the server.js file. We actually, oh, I deleted that. What we need to do is import user from the model. So /model/user.model.js. And we can create a new user from the stuff inside the request body. What I typically do is, if you follow this, like user await, user create kind of thing, and pass the request.body inside, it makes it hard for you to know what is being passed. So what I typically do is I like to make it a lot more explicit. I will do like first name, last name email equals to request body. So we destructure the values and then pass the values individually in. This, some people might not like it because this is like an extra step. All right, but well, who cares? I think this is a lot better. Okay, so what we do then is await user.save. This save function exists on a Mongoose document. So this creates a Mongoose document. So if we log user like we did before, it's not, we don't see it here because we did not send the request, but let's send it. Cannot destructure property first name because it's undefined. Oh yeah, we need to add some stuff into the body. And in this case, we can send a form. All right, since we're using API client, it's easier to send a form rather than send some JSON which you have to manually code, and it's not a very nice interface personally because it doesn't autocomplete like VS Code. So let's send through a form. First name, and the value is Zhao, and last name, the value is Liu. You can see that we can put the dash over here because we have the middleware that normalizes the request. So I talked about this in the last session. Okay, and email will be abcde@gmail.com. All right, and then I'm going to hit send. And let's give it a check. Press the body, and we are going to stop the rest of the stuff. It's undefined. Why? Let's try sending JSON first. I typically don't use this kind of thing because I use the API version, as in the actual test version. And email is, oh, sorry, why did I put my real email? And we have to do like double quotes. All right, and I'm going to send it again. There we go. There we have the first name and last name and email. I think I should probably have sent a form encoded instead of a form. But whatever, this you can play around with Thunder Client and check things out. So let's send a JSON over, first name, last name, email. And then we're going to grab it. Now, if we create a user and log the user, you can see send. Again, the duplicate key error request because we have that user here. So let's trash it at first. All right. So this is the document. You can see that there's also V0, which means that this is version 0 of the document. It is not being updated by any means before. And as it gets updated, this will increase to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You may want to look at it, you may not. Most of the time, there's no need to bother with this. Okay. And we save the user. Once the user is being saved, you can log it again. This is kind of, do we have that still? That's only in the controller. Refresh, trash this. Then. All right, so there we go. This is being saved. The results of what is sent back to you as you do user.save is the same document as well. Okay. And what we just did over here is rest.status. That's not 201. Rest.json user, which sends the information back, this entire information back to the front end. Now, there's a bit of a problem here because we don't need to send the V00 thing over to the front end. Okay, so this is one of the parts where it gets a little bit advanced and you won't see most courses or articles telling you about it. What we can do is we can go to user.model and we can manipulate the JSON. So when it sends to JSON, we can manipulate the model such that we don't send the version thing back. what we do is we need to do user schema.set to JSON. This is like the method, and we're going to transform it. So I'm going to remove this first. This ID right now is a Mongoose object. So it behaves slightly differently from a string. We convert it to a string so it's easier for the front end to use. And we delete this v00 thing so the front end doesn't see it. Okay. And now if we do the same thing, but we have to trash this information first and click send, you can actually see that there is no more v00. __ v thing inside the response. So this lets you clean up the response you're sending over to the front end very easily. Good so far?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now that's how you create a user. Now the next thing you want to do after creating a user is to be able to get the user. Okay, to get the user, we are going to go back into our routes and go get, because getting is reading a document. So get one user, and then we can say users with an email address. Okay, because we haven't had any authentication layer built in yet. So this is how we can get it. And we can get user by email, for example. And in this controller file, spot function get user by email. We need to import this. There's request and response. And in this case, we're getting the email through the params. So email equals to request.params. If we log the email, let's create a new request. Let's see, Thunder client. We can save the stuff we have the collection. So let's add to collection request. Name will be create user. And we'll create a new collection that says test project or Mongo Node Express MongoDB project. Okay, so if you go into the collections, we can see all of the things that we have. You can press to send the thing again if you want to. Now let's create a new request. And in this case, we are going to send it as a GET request to api/v1/user/abcde@gmail.com. Okay. Typically, we don't get like at here. We need to URI encode the URL, but let's see what happens. Generally, we don't send an email address. We send an ID instead. So let's get an ID. Let's not add improper stuff to your heads at this point. So we'll do ID. Get user by ID instead of email. So and ID, we can log the ID to check it. So let's send a fake ID back now. The fake ID query parameters ID. Not a query parameter, sorry. So the ID will be say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Send, not found. Users S. There we go. We have just logged 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inside the console because we grabbed the ID from here. Any questions on this one?
No.
Okay, cool. Now to get information from to find the document from Mongoose, what we do is await user find by ID. I think it's find by ID. Let's try it out. And let me close this one. Set. Cast the object ID field for value. Okay, that doesn't work. So it's not as simple as populating what. All right, here's how to do it. User.find1. And you can do a bracket. The ID is ID because you need to find by the ID. And to find anything in Mongoose, you can, like, if this is email, you can find by email like this. This is the property key that you're looking at. So let's log user. We are going to expect that this user is not found because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is not a valid user. Cast to object type failed again. Let's see. Interesting. Model user. Just give me a moment. Let me remember what I did. I'm pretty sure I did the same thing. Okay. So the object ID, right. So the thing about Mongoose is if you want to find by ID, you need to use the, what's that? Not this. Search for it. In my case, I actually gave the actual object ID thing. This is irritating. So let me show it to you that the email works for now. Okay. And say, we ignore the ID for now. So we can see that this gets the thing. As you can see that there's a problem here if we pass the ID straight away. So we need to cast a string back to a Mongoose object. So convert string to Mongoose ID. Yes. It's this. Import Mongoose. ID equals to Mongoose types object ID, and then now if we pass the ID back, it should work. What? All right. Apparently, there seems to be some sort of requirement. So let's go with this. There we go. Okay, cool. So the object ID has a certain characteristics. It's a series of alphanumeric numbers. And by pressing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that sort of numbers, it doesn't work with Mongoose. So what we do is we grab that fake ID here and pass it over to MongoDB. So as you can see, like finding by ID is not that easy. So this is how you can actually do it. And it returns null because there is no such user. It doesn't turn an error, right? So if you go back to here, let's refresh. If we grabbed our actual object ID, this value, and passed it over here and click send, you can actually see that we grabbed our user ID, our user that's been created. Any questions so far?
No.
Okay, cool. So now, one of the things about the controllers and the way you structure, should save this request first. All right, save this activity, this one, save the collection, this, and I'll say get user. Yeah. All right, we can revisit this later. So going back into our files, you can see that we have like the user in the model, the user in the controller, and probably have a user route if you want to. So it gets kind of complicated. The best the best file structure that I noticed so far as I'm working with this is to create a folder in the root directory and I call it services or service. Yes, it's services or service. But actually, I call it source, SRC. Rename SRC. Put it into the root. And then I'll put the user controller inside a user folder. Drag this in here. Some things will not be found because we have to change where it is at. So let's close off certain things. So like user controller, we just shifted this. So it's no longer here. It is inside src / user controller.js. And I typically rename it in such a way where I say user.controller.js. That's my personal preference. Okay, and then I'll put the user model into the same file. So that now I can easily grab the user model from my controllers. So I can delete the controller folder and the model folder. And at this point, I will have one more file, which I will call the service layer. So let's do that. Service.js. The whole idea of a service is when you're actually building your API routes, your controllers, you don't really want to have to remember, oh, I need to cast it into the object type again and all that stuff. So you can create a function that says swap function get user by ID, for example, and you give it an ID. And if you can import Mongoose and the model here. If the user, so type of ID is a string, then you set ID equals to, then you cast it into the object type. If it's not, you don't have to cast it, that kind of thing. And then return user.find1id. So this is get user by ID. Looks a little bit wrong. There we go. Okay. And inside here, we can just import get user by ID from the user service. But since it's the same name, I typically just do user service, import, I think star as user service. And we can remove these two lines, which is more like how you connect to the database kind of code to get the service layer. So user service, get user by ID. And if we go back into our Thunder client and get user, send. Oops, connection was refused. Cannot find model. Or where did I get this from? Project server.js. So I actually do have. Yeah, I don't need that. User.service.js. All right. So now if you go back to our Thunder client and send, commenting, oops, something is wrong here. Right. Let's just do the type checking later. Why? What's wrong? Converting circular. That creates just an error. Oh, because it has to be an async function. So let's just do it this way. So show it to you. There we go, it's done. The reason why it needs to be an async function, we need an await here because user.find1 is an async function. Now, in the way I code, like if I just return a promise over here, this is a promise. If I return a promise, I actually do not know I return a promise. So what I typically like to do is I set this as an async function. So it's extremely clear that it returns a promise. And then I'll just do this. User equals to await find here and return the user. So now we can send this. It's fine. It's right. And if the value is a string, which it is right now, so like type of ID. If we log it, then put this over here, and I'll put it at the bottom. Yeah, so it's kind of like, well, we're playing with many things here. You can see that this is a string, but if we log this ID later, and there's actually an object. So we can check whether the ID is a string or is a Mongoose object. Most likely, the easiest way is to check if it's a string. So if ID equals to string, type of ID is a string, then we set this. Then this function can be used for actual Mongoose IDs or just the ID string. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So the reason why we're doing a service layer then is that we can create certain things like this as well. So like this is still easy, but async function, create user, and then we can say we grab the first name, last name, and email. And inside here, we're just gonna say this, right? And then return user. So when we create a user, we can just get this. And in our controllers, if you look at the API, you go like, okay, I'm gonna say create a user. What is create a user? You look into the controller, and the controller says, I will grab these 3 values, and then I will put these 3 values into a function called create user, and I'll get back my user, and I'll return that user. Okay, it seems quite clear in the brain what's going on, versus I have to grab the model, then I have to save the model and all that stuff. So this makes your code clean and easy to understand. Any questions?
No.
Yeah.
It was easy.
Yeah, so like it's actually quite easy once you manage to understand what people are talking about when how you structure the projects and all that stuff. I think we should stop here for today because the next layer we're going to go into can be quite complex. Let me take a look. All right, there are a couple
Were
of
you going to
things.
sample? I mean, you have that, I think, in your article, right? Because you didn't create. So, right, you're going to go through all of the CRUD, or you'll read, update, delete.
I actually didn't explain this inside the article because this is kind of like high level structuring stuff. So a couple of things we can do over here. Oh, I forgot. We actually need to send in the first name, last name, and email. So a couple of things that we can do here.
And give me 1 minute. I need to.
All right, I'm just going to continue. All right. So a couple of things that we can do over here is that we can do some sort of checking or defensive sort of coding, if you will. So let's say, for example, when you search for a user and the user is not found, we should not return res.json. What we can do is, if not user, we can throw an error that says user is not found. So if that's the case, if we go back into get user and say Thunder client, what's that Thunder client thing? Here we go. We're going to create a new one, duplicate, and we get user get non-existing user, and I'm just going to change a couple of characters. We send the user is not found, we can send it back as an error message. And now you notice that the status is 500, but it shouldn't be. If you have paid attention to the API class that we did a couple of months ago, you can go and look it up. I think I mentioned that somewhere. Not this one, but if we do API, I think session 2. Oh, wait, was it session 1? There we go, session 1. All right. So the general status codes are grouped into 5 classes. You can also find this in async.js, the course. Right. So I'm just going to paste it here. General status codes are grouped into 5 classes. If you cannot find a user, it should not be a internal server error. It should be a 404 not found. So the easy way to send an error is to say, let's do an install HTTP errors and save this, because this package allows us to create error messages easily, and we can import create error from HTTP errors. And I'm just going to say return create error, and we're going to give it a code 404, user is not found. And then now if I send this over, I see, oh, this is for throw new error. So code is 404, user is not found, the status is 404. So this is how you create an API with the correct error messages. So I mentioned about defensive coding a little bit here. So if say first name, you can do stuff like first name equals the first name dot trim. So you trim it off if you did not remember to do it in your user model. So this is like trim and lowercase. So if this is done in the user model, you don't have to worry about it. You can just bypass it. Okay. And there is one more thing. When we create a user, you generally create a password, right? Password is also a string. But let's talk about creating passwords inside the next one, because that goes to user authentication and all that stuff. Now, with just a little bit more time left, let me share with you how to update a user. When you update a user, you can use like put or patch. Both of them updates a single resource. The difference between put and patch is, I think put updates the entire user and patch updates one field of the user or something. Can't really remember. And from what I'm seeing so far, here you go, put modifies the record information and create a new record if one is not available. And patch updates a resource without sending the entire body in the request. So up to you. Generally, from what I'm experiencing so far, some APIs have put, some APIs have patched, some APIs only have one of them. So if you're creating your own API, it's up to you. So if you're updating a user, you kind of want to do like this. Send in the user ID, update user, let's create that as a user controller. For async function, update user. Okay. And then we're going to get what we want to update, right? So update user, have it here. In this case, we can get the ID from the params again, and we need to grab the user. So let's pull this down a little bit. Once user equals to await blah blah blah, and we can update the user like that. So let me see how I did that over on my side. That's fine. So if first name, if it's just 3 of them, and we do a patch request, we can do this as an easy way. So if there's a last name, we update the last name. If there's a first name, we update the first name. Otherwise, you use what is already there. And if there's an email, we update the email, for example. This is more of a put request. If it's a patch request, it will just be one of them, but there will be a different story. And update user here. Okay. And then now we can go to Thunder client, and then we can do it. We can rename this and say update user Zell. Okay, we are going to send in a put request, and the body will be a JSON content. Say we are going to change the email address to having a good time gmail.com. Okay, so we send in the user ID, we are updating the email, and then after updating the email, we want to save the user. Wait user.save. And we return the user. Then if we click send here, not found, put users ID. So go to V1, put users ID, update user, send. User is not found. So, oh, did I? Why is it not found? It's now. All right, just give me a moment. I need to go and check why it's not there. User.find one is fine. That's fine. Not set anything. Let's see. Get users by ID is not found, but the ID seems to be correct. This is the that's correct. Copy this. Oh, yeah. Well, apparently I made a mistake with the ID. Copied the wrong one. This is actually get non-existing user. Okay, I got a non-existing user instead. So we got the user, and we can update the user like this and save. So this will return the saved document, and we are going to return it to the API. So save. You can see that we changed the email to having a good time at gmail.com. Any questions?
Nope.
Like Mongoose actually has many.
Yeah, I was looking at some of that.
Like what's that called? If you look at the document, if you look at the queries, you can actually do like a lot of this model, find by ID, find and delete, and update. There is update one. Okay.
Yeah, those all follow the standard. I mean, they're probably wrapping it, but
Yeah. So
all that's in standard Mongo stuff.
So this is kind of like standard Mongo stuff, but very hard to use. Instead, what we did over here with Mongoose is we changed whatever we wanted to change and press save. Much easier compared to having to remember,
all those functions.
You have to grab the user, and then you have to change this thing, and with a very specific API. We just grab the user, treat it like a normal object, kinda. It's not really a normal object, but kinda. And then save it. So this is how you update a user easily. Now, since we're talking about APIs and stuff, right? So let's finish up the CRUD. We're just going to delete the user. Okay. In deleting the user, now, when you build your own API, you may not need to delete the user if you do not have to. So like play by ear.
Right.
So this is just to show you a full example of how such a thing would look like. All right, delete the user. Gonna put it up here, and then what we're gonna do is, again, ID equals to params, and then in this case, we do not need to get user by ID anymore. We're just gonna await service delete user ID. Okay. rest.json. We'll ignore this for now. We'll go back to our user service and we have a delete user function. And we grab an ID from it. And what we can do is user.delete one. So we use the Mongoose API in this case, delete one from the user model, since we're going to delete that anyway, and return deleted. And then we can say rest.json message user deleted. User is user, or just like this. Now, if we go to our Thunder client and then we create another request and say this is delete. Okay, we don't need this. We're going to delete the user. And rename this to delete user. If we send this, it should see user deleted, acknowledge true, deleted count 1. Okay, so we deleted one person. Any questions?
Nope.
All right, so then we go like full circle, get, post, put, delete. That's kind of what you need to know about creating an HL API, interacting with the database. There are a couple of layers. We can talk about authentication and so on going forward. This is just very simple. User without even like passwords for now, but this gives you an idea of how to really put things together with Mongo and Mongoose. All right, I think that's all I have to share for you with you today. Any more is going to go like really complicated. We'll go 1 more hour.
Sure. Yeah, we can wait till next Monday.
All right, cool. Any questions
Or
before
Wednesday.
we end the session?
Nope, I'm good.
All right, cool.
Okay, a lot to play with now.
Looks
so a lot
cool,
of things
right?
to play with.
Yeah, this looks cool, right? The way after I explain it,
yeah,
it's actually not that hard.
No, it was a good explanation. Very straightforward.
That's all.
I'm looking forward to learning Mongoose because I wrote some Python stuff for Mongo before, and it was like there was no wrapping, and it was like all this. Or I wrote a lot of functions on my own, which Mongoose gives you now.
Yeah, so it's a lot easier nowadays if we use it's actually a lot easier to use Mongoose compared to Mongo, but Mongoose creates a problem too. So the problem with Mongoose is that it is a global how do I call it? So it populates your entire database on a global basis, right? The problem with Mongoose is once you start using Mongoose, it's easy to use, but
you can't get away from it. You're stuck. It's like the mob.
No, that's fine. The problem with Mongoose is that if you want to start testing,
right,
because Mongoose uses that database, you kind of can't separate it away if you're doing whatever we're doing right now. But there is a way to split and create one separate test and one separate MongoDB, which means one separate Mongoose ORM kind of thing for each test. That's one of the things, one of the more advanced things we're going to go into later on.
okay.
That will be important. As you can see right now, we're using Thunder client, testing one thing at a time. But if let's say I want to test creation of 3 people, I do not want to go to Thunder client and click myself for 3 people. I just want the test to run automatically without me having to think about it.
Okay.
Right, so that will be more advanced, and we'll get to that as we go.
Okay. Quick question. I do have one quick question. So in Node, this is about Node in general. So a lot of things I've seen about Node says, go to the project directory and do node and, doing a init npm, doing a init, right? And then you add your packages. It's nice that you can have only certain packages per password, but it also seems like a real pain. Do you use a global version of Node, or do you have a script that says, well, I'm going to add these standard packages, and then you add ones you need because your project needs these other things?
Sorry again. I kind of like was checking some stuff out as you started the question. So
Okay, so in Node, right, a lot of things I see say go to your project directory and do init, a node session, and it builds a bunch of files in your project area, and then you add the packages you want. But that seems like a lot to do every time you want to start a new project. Or do you have a template that like installs like a set of core, does an npm install for like a lot of things you use every time up front? Or do you use a common version of Node that everyone just reads,
so for node projects, there are scaffolding tools in the past.
Right.
I think that's called Yo, but it's fallen out of popularity now. So what I do generally with my node projects is it's not as hard as you imagine, right? So let's say for example, we get to this project again, okay? And say if you want to create a new project next time around, you can, there's so many dependencies. All right, I'll copy all of this, for example, paste it into a new package.json file, run npm install, and I'll get all my dependencies back. And then I can just
you can add new ones as you need. Okay.
What?
So you kind of you just kind of reuse your package.json.
Correct. And then
With some basic stuff.
if I want to remove some dependencies, I can remove that, and then I npm install, and those dependencies will be removed from the new file.
Right.
Yeah, I don't want to mess around with this right now.
I agree.
Okay.
I get the concept.
Yep, we're cool. Well, I just realized that you can, with Thunder Client, you can click on run all, and then you can run the entire thing. So you don't have to press every single thing one at a time. And then it will give you all the errors that you want to see. So you kind of have to sequence it out. Like, say, let's trash this first. And if we create a user, get user, update user, and run. All right, get user 0 is 404, so this is not correct. But non-existing user is 44, this is correct. Update user is 44, is not correct. Well, that's because we created a user and then the user ID has changed, but we can't really put it into the next one. Okay, so that's why a standard test will be better. Yeah.
Well, the other thing you can do, I mean, that's kind of why, at least I've seen, that relying on UIDs sometimes is bad. But you can actually, as I seem to recall from one of my Mongo classes, for testing, you can force UIDs to be what you want. You don't have to let it create it for you. So you can create a bunch of standards. You can test keep repeating your tests and not break them.
I wouldn't worry about that, because in an actual testing framework,
right,
you can actually use and reuse that user ID.
Right.
Right. So if you're creating like a fixed ID kind of thing, you're hacking Mongo in a way. When testing, I generally do not want to hack things around. So I'm like, okay, cool. Let's use it as I would use it normally. Well, that's a topic for another day, and there'll be something nice to have. All right. If there are no further questions, let's end the session for today.
Okay.
Thanks for being here, and I hope you have a nice day, nice evening, good sleep.
Well, yeah.
And to everyone who is here as well, thank you, and see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.